So, without further ado, we'll swap you over. And I'll pass you over to Alice Lindor and Jean-Marc Schnaas.
Thank you. We'll start the talk, so this will be a little talk. And so what we will present tonight is the it's a research that we have been carrying on with Annalise and me at the Laboratory of Aerodynamics in Paris, and it's a 1.5 research long. And during this research, we set up an exhibit. So this exhibit is right now on display at the GBR Gallery. So we encourage you to go and see the exhibit. And the question we ask during this research is the question of Anthropocene, because there is this idea that there is a new geological age that is made by man. What we mean by that is that men are now category forces able to shape the planet. And there is a paradox in the Anthropocene is that we want to define a new age, but the age, the geological age, is defined on the southern Europe time scale, and we just got an observation time of just a few decades to define this new age. So there is something possible paradox in that.
So the project, can you hear me? So the project Lost in Fathom set in perspective the human time and the time scale of those forces that compose our planet, being oceanic, geologic, atmospheric. Those forces that in fact feel inalterable, but whose equilibrium is revealing itself as in a fragile and sensitive dynamics. It's also revealing this complex and tangled relation between all the spheres and the human. So we're going to show you a short introduction about, in fact, the history of the island that is at the starting point of this project. This island is called Nuuk. The etymology of this term comes from the Inuit term, in fact, meaning the summit or the promontory. So, in fact, the history of Nuuk becomes a vantage point from which to reflect on the entry of the planet into this new geologic age, the Anthropocene. And also for us, it enabled to engage with forces, the oceanic and the geologic, that timescale in fact unfolds over a duration that is difficult to encompass for the human mind. So this is the brief version of the history of Nuuk.
L'île de Nuuk se trouvait au centre d'importantes turbulences océaniques. Des tourbillons générés par le passage de courants d'eau, denses et froids, qui plongeaient vers les profondeurs. Bien que recouvert d'une épaisse couche de glace, Nuuk était une île volcanique, créée par la poussée depuis le manteau terrestre de roches anormalement chaudes. Cette poussée avait engendré la déformation du relief sous-marin alentour et l'apparition d'une chaîne de montagnes, en grande partie immergées. Ces montagnes avaient jailli à la jonction de deux plaques tectoniques, constituant une faille qui traversait l'île, la fracturant d'est en ouest, avant de s'évanouir dans les profondeurs de l'océan. Lorsqu'une troisième expédition atteint les côtes de Nuuk le 30 juillet 1976, les scientifiques embarqués remarquent que la partie de terre émergée avait rétréci et que la ligne de côte sud avait reculé de 953 mètres. Il fut décidé d'installer un poste d'observation relié au continent par satellite. Cependant, en 2012, la station cessa d'émettre. Des images satellites révélèrent que l'île avait entièrement disparu de la surface de l'océan.
C'est à cette même période qu'à Brisbane, en Australie, le 34e Congrès international de géologie se penchait sur la question de reconnaître ou non l'Anthropocène. Une ère géologique nouvelle dans laquelle nous serions entrés. Une ère où nos sociétés industrielles deviennent un facteur majeur de la transformation de la planète. L'activité humaine impacte la Terre et son écosystème à tel point qu'une nouvelle strate géologique est en train d'apparaître. La disparition de l'île de Nook est un événement singulier ou la conséquence directe de l'émergence de l'Anthropocène.
So the disappearance of the Nook Island is asking us a question is that we know it has occurred at the same time we declare the Anthropocene, but is there a causal link between different events like the geological forces, the human activity? Is there something just a correlation, or is there something that will be just an occurrence of two independent phenomena? So for that, we have to reinterrogate all the geological, all the tectonic forces. So this is the investigation we start to carry on with analysts to say, okay, there is over the geological forces, there is the ionosphere with the ocean and the rain and the water on the planet. There is the atmosphere. There is also the lithosphere that will be very important because this Nook Island is just at the frontier between two tectonic plates. And of course, there is anthroposphere that we call the man activity. And the key question is to know if there is a causal link between one of those spheres, or maybe several of them, that will make this island disappear. So we have to build some scenarios on that to understand if there is an event that may have got this island to disappear. So this is what we will start with two main ideas. First, since this island is close to the North Pole at a particular spot where the water is diving, so maybe the ocean has a particular impact because it's close to this very place that the water is very cold. So one person that, or a sphere that will be involved in that will be the ocean. The other one is the lithosphere because it's close to this tectonic plate motion moving apart of each other. So this is the start of the investigation.
Yeah, and indeed, the island was located at the junction between two tectonic plates. So, in fact, the investigation started by an expedition at the frontier in the line between the Eurasian and the American plates. The idea of the expedition was to try to get some clues to understand the possible geologic events that may have occurred on the island and led to its disappearance. So for 10 days, I walked within the rift, within the fracture between those two continents. In fact, the rift appeared as a corridor of basalt, absolutely monumental. In some parts, it was so vast that a whole landscape had settled there. In some other parts, moss and lichens had covered the fractures. And further, some water had just totally filled the fracture. Water coming from the last ice age. Water, in fact, coming from glaciers above the fracture, and then filling the whole rift. So I dived into this part filled with water and extracted a sample of the rock from the wandering continents. This rock was then studied in a a geologic lab, the lab of Jérôme Fontin at the École Normale Supérieure. And we placed it under the same constraints that the rock at several kilometers deep under the surface of the Earth, also at the line between the tectonic plates. So it was placed under really high pressure and temperature, and the result was a fracture. And this fracture released the sound.
This sound has been obtained with this machine. So it's a machine where you, as I said, where you put the sample under the pressure. So this is the same pressure as 3 kilometers down in the Earth's crust. So it's 1,000 bars, so 1,000 atmosphere. So it's very high pressure. And then you exert motion on this, or force on these samples, and at some point this sample will break. So what we earn is the breaking of first little crystal, and then a series, and then all the cascade of breaking. And from that we call that an echogram, because from this little rock we may unfold the whole story of the whole plate. So it's a little like an hologram in optics. If an hologram, if you take just a small piece of an hologram, you have all the picture of the big piece, and this you have to unfold that with hologramic interferences. But for this sample, it's more like a similitude, the way we move from a small scale to a large scale. And that sound was the start of a series of tests. So we may say maybe this sound is containing part of the dynamics of the blade moving, so of the telluric plate. So this was the first experiment we did. So this is a small scale. We produce plate in the lab. I will not go into the explanation. You have to come and see the exhibit for that. And this is a replay of what is happening on Earth to create the plate. So the oceanic plate or the continental plate. So it's a model, and of course, to put that back to the scale of human, we have to scale it down to a small something that fits also in the laboratory. And from that, we move back to the scale of the human, but to reinterrogate the large scale. So this was one of the echo, and the echo of this motion, so the motion of the telluric plate, is contained in the sound that you have heard just before in the little rock. So this is one echo, but the movement of telluric plate is not continuous, so you cannot observe that. It's very intermittent, and it occurs through earthquake. So the way plates are moving they stick together, and at some point they will move apart, and this is what we call an earthquake. So the motion is through earthquake. So the second, and this is the causal link, the plate moves, and then there is an earthquake. So we investigate in the second series of installation this motion of earthquake into the earthquake. So for that, you have to store energy into the rock, deform the rock because the plates are moving, and suddenly you will have a slip. The rock are sticking together, the plates are sticking together, there is friction, and at some point this friction will rupture, and this is the sound that we heard in the record, the sound record. And so this is the way we will do that in the installation. So this was the prototype, this is the final piece, and the mysterious thing we look at underneath with, first it was Antoine Garcia, the first person who helped us with all this installation. This is Neil Tonder that helped us with all the final installation. And in that case, we split in a way, because we do in a way science, so we may split the two forces. One force is the elastic forces, and the other one is the friction between the rocks. And in the exhibit, they are in two separate spaces, just to get them, to express them more clearly. So this is one thing, and the next one, this will lend to a landslide.
So then, in fact, we explored this last echo from this geologic history extracted from the rock. And then we transposed this process into the scale of the lab, experimenting with different ways of triggering a landslide. looking at the relation between the earthquake and the landslide. And so there we're working with a granular flow where we apply different, in fact, earthquake actions. And we've been recording the almost invisible slide of the land with a fast-feed camera. And for this, in fact, we are working with PhD students in geology, physics, hydrodynamics, and that was part of a 2 weeks art and science workshop during a summer school in the University of Cambridge at the Applied Mathematics department. And in fact, what was really interesting with these science students in terms of the fiction was to see, in fact, how the fiction was influencing the approach and the way, in fact, bringing them into the narrative of the island, of its disappearance, facilitated them to engage with this art and science process, freeing them from a kind of pattern or the usual pattern of work and logic. So the fiction was appearing as just a way of bringing a different context, opening up new possibilities, new potentialities. And the fiction was almost becoming a laboratory in itself, a place from which to explore the real, but without the constraints and the laws and the logic of the actual world. So the way this piece was done was collective, and then 8 groups of students participated, and when one group would have finished, they would leave a message, a kind of research legacy for the next group. And here we've got a short film of their experience.
About doing this, like overall, there are 2 main things that you have to think about.
We tried shaking it at the end to pretend there was an earthquake.
And we tried to destroy it. Actually, we were very successful in it. Air or liquid to kind of create an explosion from inside.
But we had real problem trying to get the water to flow out of the right place.
We made the island collapse into the sea. We had a big avalanche that caused a water wave. The island was still there, so...
We tried to recreate the Matterhorn,
yep,
and then destroyed the Matterhorn.
Yeah. Next time...
Make them steep.
Yeah.
And make them wet. Moisture helps it do interesting things.
And we experimented with ravines, so maybe that could be taken a step further.
And make sure the balloon is filled enough that it actually flows.
Yeah.
So yeah, we thought the next group could work on getting rid of the island completely.
And our gift to you is very little remaining dry sand.
Yes.
You're welcome.
We hope you good luck.
Yeah, we should say that we already made it disappear.
So at the end of this geologic investigation, in fact, nobody could ascertain that a unique and sole cause was at the origin of the disappearance of Nook Island. Because to slide, Ellen may have been also weakened by different forces that could have been related to the atmosphere or the ocean. The land may have been eroded by storms or high rains or waves. And in fact, going back to the history and the island itself, and knowing the oceanic landscape around the island, Nook being in fact in the center and next to water dive from global oceanic circulation, we decided to conduct the second part of the investigation towards oceanic forces. And as part of the research, we discovered a wave. In fact, we captured a wave, maybe the last wave to have dived along the shores of the island. What you see on the right of the image is the wave in motion in its tank, and on the left, the physical shadow of the wave cast on the walls of the gallery.
In fact, we capture a wave, we see the shadow, but maybe we should go back and ask the real wave in the ocean what occurred to the Nook Island, because this is just a capture, so it's not for real for that. And that is very crucial because this wave just died at the place where all the deep water is forming, so close to the pole. And we know this is a very particular spot because this is a spot that starts this very long journey of the water through all the ocean, so there is a single loop. This loop through the ocean in the depth, this takes more than 1,000 years, so it's a very long time scale. And this is very crucial because this is the memory of the climate of the past. So this is what is stabilizing right now the climate. And there is evidence that this is fading out. So maybe if we are able to collect information from the disappearance of the island, maybe we may say something about this long loop on the climate. And for that, we may go to the oceanographic community because they are trying also to observe, not the last wave as we do, but they try to observe what is the evolution of this current. So doing so, we call for sample of water that may have passed by this the island of Nuuk, and the oceanographic community start answering our call. So we got some samples from the white rooms that where they store all the very precious recent water samples they collect through the field experiment. So this is one we collect in the ocean lab in Paris. This is another also in the ocean lab in Paris. And at some point we got an email from Harry Bridon, that is one of the famous researchers and oceanographer because he started all the campaign from when he was in the States. And he said, okay, I've been collecting each time I was doing a campaign, I've been collecting samples. And he has been collecting 2 samples because he's a scientist, so if one sample is failing, he will use the second one. And then he has been collecting those samples since the 70s, and he got for every single trip samples from that. And after one day, so we went to see him, he said, okay, come and see my collection. So this is the collection, is the very dusty way he was keeping that. And at the end of one day talk with us, he said, okay, I'm going to donate to you, to the exhibit, half my collection of samples, and we got this collection of samples now on display in the exhibit. And this is very important because if we think about this circulation, so those different samples, even Harry's or the recent one, the circulation is very slow, so they are all taken at the same time, no matter if it were in the 70s or not, compared to 1,000 years at the same time. But they have been collecting in different positions along this loop. So some of them have seen the coast of Nuuk 100 years ago, others have seen the coast of Nuuk 1,000 years ago, and they go along, and there is maybe a wave going along still now.
But then in the meantime, the island of Nuuk had disappeared. So the question to be asked is whether the disappearance of the island is linked to the modification of the climate, being it linked to human activities or not. Or could we ask that the disappearance of the island on the journey of the specific oceanic circulation has had an impact on the circulation itself and changed its characteristics, and that maybe the disappearance of the island is, at cause in the change of our actual climate. So, to finish, we would like to thank Heather for organizing this evening, and also to thank Neil Tonder and Antoine Garcia that have helped realizing the installations, and Robert Devchik and Charles Kolob for their wonderful and supportive presence, and the lab in the École Polytechnique, and our sponsors.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing the process and extensive collaboration. What an endeavour. Working with the collaboration between the two of you, and it extends to laboratory work, engaging students, oceanographers, and putting that all together. There are already lots of hands, so I'm going to open it straight out. What would you like to ask?
We've got. I don't know if you can hold your time mic. We seem to be short of a mic.
Yes.
Can
now
you
we
hold
should share
between?
The mic.
Yeah, if you unclip it, and that should hopefully work.
Hello, yeah, I want to ask one of those sort of child's questions, because I heard Anais use the word "the same water," And I know that Jean-Marc used, Jean-Marc studies clouds. So if you take an ice sample from the bottom as far down as you can drill in Antarctica, you bring it up and you look at it to compare what's happening with the climate, and you take one of your samples of water, what do you mean by the same water? What is the same water? Is this the water that we have right now the same as the water you might have seen during the Ice Age? What do you mean by this, the term the same water? Is water transformed? Is it changed through evaporation and going into clouds? What is this? I just need, this is my child's question. What is the same water? Is this water the same in your samples as the water you might get from the ice sample?
Yes. So the first, the ocean is much more mobile than the ice cap. So in the ocean, in fact, even when you look at the picture of the ocean, this picture is changing every other year in the scientific community, meaning that we don't know at all what is happening out there. We have we have little knowledge of the trajectories of the water, and so first it's kind of unknown. Second, it's kind of schematic because there is lots of mixing, so it's very difficult. A sample of water will have mixed, so we may have sample of water that are coming from the Mediterranean and the Antarctica. But there is still a few ways of getting where this water was, from the chemical content or mineral content of the water, from also the O2, so the same we do for the ice, so the isotope of the oxygen that will tell you maybe some age of the water. And sometimes I'm not an oceanographer doing that, field oceanographers, but they're able to say, okay, maybe part of this water is coming from that place, part is coming from that place, and they have an idea of the mixing. I don't know if this answers your questions. Maybe too much.
That's kind of an answer. Anyway.
Yeah. And then what is quite spectacular with these samples, or actually the water collection that we have, is that they come from this circulation that, in fact, we didn't mention, but this circulation takes around 1,500 years to do its whole journey.
That's right. I heard that at the Anthropocene Monument Conference last weekend in Toulouse with Bruno Latour. Mm-hmm. They made this extraordinary statement that it takes over 1,000 years for the water to go around. Sorry.
I heard this extraordinary statement that it takes over 1,000 years for the water to circulate around the world.
Yes, I mentioned that.
Yeah, so that's why, this idea of engaging specifically with the time scale of this circulation, and also thinking about the impact of humans that, may be actual, but then the consequence may only be, noticed in a few centuries.
And this is why the water may be very surprised coming back after such a trip, back to Nook Island, observing that there is no more island to dive down again around.
Can I ask something about the balance between the systematic and the poetic in the process of making the work and in the work itself? I really urge everybody to go to the exhibition if you haven't seen it already. It's absolutely beautiful and compelling, and you never know quite what you're looking at. But there's a balance between it utterly systematic and there's evidence-based, and then there's the beauty and poetry to it. So how do you reconcile this?
Well, it's been really constructed between these two worlds, and then really one feeding the other. So, for example, we started the residency by engaging in a summer school for 2 weeks following some hydrodynamics course, and then we had long scientific discussions, and then after maybe 2-3 months, that fed and inspired the story of Nook. And then Nook Island became the starting point for this investigation and engagement with the geologic and the oceanic timescales. So it's been really just a journey from one to another.
So finding the hub of the narrative and then drawing the scientific investigation to that.
And then in fact, within the poetics or the narrative, some of the really key, and precise scientific elements, are important just in the fact of making real the narrative.
And maybe to answer also that is that we have to realize that science is also just a narrative of the world. So it's one narrative among other narratives. So what we do in art and science is that we're mixing that narrative with others. And this is maybe the particular texture that you have been sensitive to in that.
It's a sort of half continuation of what Heather was saying. The way in which you handle the ideas through a creative as well as a systematic process, did that influence the way that the direction that the actual systematic scientific investigation took, as in did your perspective coming from an aesthetic as well as a programmatic point of view, lead to the research, or vice versa, or was it in tension between those two along the way?
And you mean the research in this art and science process, or the research in more broader sense?
Well, what do you think that if you come to your scientific research from the point of presenting it within artifacts or works of art, does that change your relationship to how you gather data?
Yes, so I think one answer would be that if you imagine that science is a narrative, then you have to properly imagine what is the proper narrative, even the way you will investigate and what will be the trajectory of investigation you should follow in science. And there is no protocol, I call that a protocol, to think back again. So it's not just reflective, it's introspective, to feel back again what is the proper, meaningful science you should do as a scientist. So the main impact is not on the technique, maybe on the ideas, but is the way you formulate what science is all about.
The use of the information in a way?
Yes, but it's more about the question. So the information you get them when you have asked the question, but the way science, the question is how you formulate the question and what question you are formulating, and more than what are the answers that you are giving to that. And in the formulation of the question, there is two levels, is what you are able to do, but you are also, there is even just in the formulation of the question that you may introduce a shift in the perception that will correspond to that way of asking the question. Thank you.
Much of talk in relation to climate change is of a destructive nature in our disappears. Do you consider the reverse of that when the island, as they do, also appear?
Yeah, well, in fact, the history of the island was constructed from the story of real islands, and then one of the key inspiration was this island in Surtsey, called Surtsey, in the southern coast of Iceland, which appeared in 1972. So, in fact, what is interesting by making an island emerge or disappear, it's also thinking about this geologic time as something really, or a sphere really not still, which sometimes we tend to feel this, and then, being walking in the fracture between the continents, the geologic just appeared as such a dynamic force, and so really engaging with this other scale of the geologic, or engaging with the deep time without thinking that it's something that is totally immovable.
Maybe just to complete, maybe the same time is not unique, so even the lithosphere motion, it involves long time scale and very short time scale, so like the appearance of one island and maybe disappearance, but on the average you will have the motion of the plate that are very, very steady. So it's all about also questioning this relationship with simple ideas on simple time scale that are much more complex than that, because there is a time scale inside a time scale inside a time scale, like a whole cascade of time scale in such a phenomenon.
Okay, we're going to take one last question.
One of the things that I really found very intriguing, both through your presentation as well as the show, which I certainly recommend, is the role of narrative and the fact that this plays such an important part in the exhibition. And it's something that scientists are fundamentally quite fearful of, or have very rigid rules in terms of how they actually construct narratives. And in a sense, I think that I'm not going to do this quite the right way, but I think one of the things that it does really, really well is actually use, or at least to my mind, you're actually using the art to actually break down, almost kind of through the science, some of these uncomfortable spaces where we talk about telling stories through science. And I don't know whether this is something that you thought about in your artistic process, or
I feel that in a way, in this case or the stories I would have constructed, for me, working with the fiction is a way to kind of reflect on the reality, and here in this case around the appearance of this new geologic age. So fiction becomes really a tool to take distance and think about this real thing happening in front of us.
Yes, and if I may just add to that, in this collaboration, the thing I've learned the most is this idea of the use of the fiction to maybe tell the truth or tell a lie, or maybe just get people to reconsider what is truth and what maybe to construct their own narrative. And this is really a plus. I've been doing lots of art and science before, but it's the first time I'm using that tool, and I go so deep into this construction of science. And this is really through this long collaboration, very intense, because there is lots of work. You come and see the exhibition, there is lots of work on that. And this is really the plus of this collaboration together, sharing that. And this is the way Anaïs has been dragging me into this fiction. And I'm not so sure, as a scientist, I may survive too long using the fiction, the way I'm using the fiction in this narrative.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So do we go along to GVR? It's on till the 29th of November, I think. It's nice, and there are various events around, so check the GVR website.
I just have the computer.
And you can go with that.